After you have finished your pillow, you will get a piece of this fusible fleece. It has a bumpy side and a soft side. The bumpy side is going to be the side that has the glue on it or adhesive that's going to stick to the fabric. And so I'm on the soft side right now. I have already drawn in a line, but I want to show you how I did that. So you're going to take your ruler, you're going to line the 0 up with the edge of your fabric, and you're going to mark some little lines out to the 8-inch point, because I want to have an 8-inch square. These strips are already, the strip that you'll get in class is an 8-inch wide piece. So I'll have those 3 little marks there that are 8 inches from the edge, and then I'm just going to use the straight edge of the ruler then to draw a straight line down. Then I'm going to slide that over here, and I'm going to use that new line, line up my 0 with the new line and measure over 8 inches. And then I'm going to do that again, and I'll repeat that process until I have 4 8-inch sections. Once you have your 4 lines drawn, then you will need to cut your pieces just straight on the line using sharp sewing shears. So I've got one piece, just cut down the line on all of the lines you drew to make your 4 pieces. Okay, so now we have our 4 8-inch squares, and then you have this extra piece. This extra piece is going to go back to the teacher. So in class there will be a designated spot to keep all of that. That way another student might be able to use it for their 8-inch pieces, or we'll use it for another project. But do not throw this away. Make sure to store it away where you're supposed to. Lay out your pieces to get ready to start sewing the strips to it. So I've got my 8-inch square, and we are going to measure across the diagonal. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take that straight edge again and line it up with the 2 points. And I'm just using a regular pin. You could use a marking pin for this, but the marking pins don't write too well, and I'm on the glue side, the bumpy side of the fusible fleece. So I'm going to use a pen to mark a line that goes straight across the diagonal. Okay, now from that point I'm going to measure over 1 inch. So my 0 point of my ruler is lined up with that straight line in the center, and then I'm going to measure over 1 inch, mark in a few places, draw a straight line down, and this is a guideline for me to know where to place that first piece. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to have my strips cut and ready to lay down. So my very first strip needs to be a 2-inch wide strip, and it will lay with the edge lining up with the outer pink line. So it should basically be centered right in the middle of the piece. So 2-inch strip, 2-inch wide strip lining up with the outside. So that center piece, the 2-inch wide strip, is laying down even with the edge that you drew in. And you want to make sure that the ends of the fabric overhang the batting. So we don't want it to be too short where it's out here. We need it to cover the whole piece of batting, hangs over a little bit. Then you're going to take the next piece that you want in line. You also want to make sure that it is long enough. It really doesn't matter how wide this piece is, but it does need to be long enough to overhang the edge of your batting piece. We're going to lay that right sides together, even with this edge, okay? Now I'm going to take just a few pins to hold it in place, because then we're going to head over to the sewing machine. To be honest, if I were sewing this at home, I would not put pins in. I would just hold the pieces in place. But because we are just practicing and just learning, I do want you to put just a few pins in, just until you're comfortable with the technique. And probably by our second square that we make, you probably won't have to do this step again where you are pinning. We'll just have to wait and see. But now I'm ready to go over and sew those together. You're gonna turn your stitch selector to 2. You can leave it at a 2.5 stitch length, that's fine. And for this, because when we turn to a 2, what that does is it takes your needle and shifts it over to the right. And so the reason we do that is because now I can use the edge of my presser foot and have a 1/4 of an inch seam, which is what I want. So rather than having to look at a spot on the throat plate for a 1/4 of an inch, if you turn your stitch selector to a 2, then it will automatically have a 1/4 inch seam lined up with the right edge and the left edge of your presser foot. Okay, so it's right in the middle. Sewing on these strips, you do not even need to backstitch. You are going to start with your foot lined up, or the edge of your fabric lined up with the right side of the foot. And so you can just start back here, drop your needle, drop your presser foot, and stitch across. As you get to your pin, you're going to want to pull it out. So don't stitch over your pins, pull it out, and then you'll put it in your pin cushion. I can kind of feel the edge of the fleece. I want to make sure I go all the way off the edge of it. Okay, and then I can just lift my needle, lift my foot, clip my threads. Okay, this sample just came off of the machine, and as you can see there, we have that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then you're going to just fold this piece over and do what is called finger pressing. So you don't have to even go to the iron if you don't want to. You can just fold it over and press it down really well with your fingers till it's nice and smooth. And then you will select your next piece. Again, you want to make sure that it is long enough to fit from here to here and cover the end of the batting. I've got another piece. I haven't cut it, so it's not really ready because I may want it a little bit thinner than this, but it is a good length. Okay, so now I just have to decide how wide I want it. I think probably what I'll do with this piece is I'm going to go cut it in half. And then, so I'll cut it right down the middle there and make 2 strips, and then maybe I can use the other half of it on another block at a later point. So you have a lot of freedom to play with your pieces in this one. They don't all have to be the same width. They can all be different. The only one that really matters as far as the width is concerned is on each of your blocks. You're going to want this center one to be a 2-inch wide strip on all 4 blocks. But as far as the rest of your pieces go, you can have flexibility. They can stay all 2 inches, or you can make some of them more narrow. So that's totally up to you. Okay, so next you'll just finger press this one over. Okay, get it nice and smooth, and then you will be looking for another piece that you like to lay across there. I'm kind of going with this like accented neutral or red monochromatic color scheme, and so you'll want to sort of keep within that concept, whatever you choose to do. And I've just got this big pile of fabrics laying there ready to go. So again, I'll take another one, make sure it's long enough. And then I'm not going to show this, but then I would again stitch it 1/4 inch, flip it open, and then I may have to add 1 or 2 more pieces at the end in order to complete this side. And then I would repeat the same process, laying a piece. Let's say I was ready to go this direction. I'm just going to lay these right sides together. And then I'll be stitching along this side, opening it this direction, and then continuing to add strips in that way. All right, so I just sewed the last strip onto this side. We'll flip it over. So basically what you're looking for, you are finished with this phase when you can no longer see any of your batting. If I flip it over to the back side, you'll see that this half of the square piece has fabric sticking out, okay? And I'll be trimming that off later. So now I just need to go back and finish up the other side, finish all 3 other pieces, and then we'll end up trimming it all up before we put them together. All right, I wanted to show you the finished block because you may have this issue here. So when I sewed on what I thought would be my last strip, which was this red one, I still had a little bit more poking through. So I just cut a really tiny scrap and sewed it at the end. And just to make sure that you are completely covering all of that fusible fleece. Now we need to take it to the ironing board and press it, and then we'll be ready to trim it up. All right, to press it, you really do just go over it. You don't have any batting showing, so you're just pressing the fabric. And also you are, in the process, melting that adhesive to the back of your pieces. So later when you begin putting these together, they should not shift around on you at all because they're sewn together, and then also that adhesive melts onto the back of each of the pieces as you press it, okay? So in class, what I'm going to have you each do will be to flip your square over, and you might notice on this side you see the stitching and on this side you don't. My machine ran out of bobbin thread when I was halfway through, and so you're not really gonna see any of this stitching, so I just popped in a new bobbin and kept going. So it really doesn't matter, but I just wanted to draw your attention to that you can see my stitching here, but you can't there. So it really doesn't matter. So you are going to take your shears and make sure that they're nice and sharp. You'll be standing up at the cutting table or at your own table, and just stand over it and give nice, even cuts across. All you are doing is trimming off any loose threads and the fabric that is excess hanging off the edge. Okay, so you will do that on the remaining 3 sides, and later on I will help you square up your pieces. I have to use a special quilting ruler in order to do that, and so this step will just help tidy up your blocks before we get to that point. All right, so you got this big pile of fabrics that's left over. You're just gonna go through them and see if any of them are worth keeping, if you could use them later. This one, I think I could use it again later on another piece. Maybe I could use this piece. It's pretty good size. But if you have pieces that are like teeny tiny like that, you can get rid of those. I mean, there's really nothing I can do with that. So I'm gonna set those aside and just kind of sort them out, save the ones I might be able to use, and get rid of the ones that I can't. So after trimming, this is what your block will look like. Oh my gosh, I love it. It's so cute. So moving on to the next 3 blocks, what you're going to do is you're going to basically just repeat the same process. So I'm going to set this one aside. I've already gone in on this one, and this again is on the bumpy side, the glue side. And I drew that line down the middle, measured over 1 inch. If you haven't done that yet on your piece, you'll need to do it. And then you're going to take that same piece that you started with on the previous one. So mine was this black and white one. This is the only piece really that matters, that you want it precisely. So it's a 2-inch piece. And again, it's lined up with this line over here. From there, I can choose whatever piece I want to lay down right sides together on top of it. And from that point, it can be just my own design. But to make the diamond effect happen on your pillow, you'll want the same piece, 2-inch wide, laid down just like that in the middle. Okay, so you're gonna go through the same process that you had completed on the other square for this one. Okay, then you'll repeat the same process again 2 more times until All the blocks have now been made and I just laid them out on my table. So you now need to design how you want your pieces to be sewn together for the front of your pillow. So there's a lot of different options you have. You could do it something like this, which is basically totally random. Or you can turn your blocks. You started each one with this like center black one. So you can try to arrange it so that they create a diamond effect going around. And that one would go like that. Okay, so you could do something like that, which I think is pretty cute. Let's see, another thing you could do is have your blacks pointing in the middle. Okay, so they're all kind of coming together in the center, almost like making an X in the middle of the pillow. Okay, so that could be kind of cute too. It's really just whatever you feel like and what you want to do. When you do have a design that you like, I would suggest taking out your phone and taking a picture of it. This is just 4 pieces, but in order to make sure that you put it together just how you like it, take that picture real quick and then you'll be able to look back at it later when you're putting all of them together. All right, so this is the design that I have decided on. I've taken my picture to make sure that I can go back and look at it later. And now I'm ready just to lay my 2 pieces right sides together. These should be all squared up and the pieces should be exactly the same size. So I'm going to put a pin in just a few places to hold it. And then when you sew it, you want to do a 1/4 of an inch seam. And it's really important on this type of project that you don't do any larger or any smaller than what the project asks for. So we want to do 1/4 of an inch seam, and I do want you to backstitch where you start and where you stop going down this side. All right, next I want you to take your seam gauge and slide over to 1/4 of an inch, so that's the second line over, 4/8, and I just want you to go in and measure your seam. I don't know if you can see that, but where my blue slider is on the edge of the quilt block, and then the end of the ruler or the seam gauge is right on the line I just stitched. I want you to just double check and make sure that you have sewn the right seam allowance before you do the next seam. If yours is off at all, if it's too big or too small, you need to come find me so that we can make sure you know where to look on the sewing machine to sew 1/4 of an inch. All right, I'm going to set this block to the side, and next I'm just going to get this one out. Do the same thing. I'm going to lay it right sides together, pin, and then sew 1/4 of an inch seam. All right, so we have our 2 blocks sewn together here and here, okay? Next, we are going to press the blocks one more time, and this time we're going to go inside of the seam and we're going to press the seam open. And it's really a bulky seam because you have the quilt batting there, or the fusible fleece. So you want a really hot iron. This is when it's important that, like earlier when we were sewing the strips, you have to make sure at that phase that you're sewing the strips to the bumpy side of your fusible fleece, because if this was the bumpy side, we'd be getting glue all over the iron. Okay, so we're just going to press that open just like that. And you'll repeat that on your other piece, do the exact same thing. Okay, now I have my pieces laid out, ready to sew the next step. Here's where I want you to take out that picture that you took earlier to make sure that you have your pieces laying in the right direction. So maybe I had forgotten, maybe it's been a class period or 2 since I last worked on this. I want to double check. I'm going to look at that picture. What I need to do to get mine back where it was when I took my picture is I need to flip this around, and what I'm looking at is these black pieces right here, making sure that they are somewhat lined up. Okay, so this is how I want mine. When you have your pieces laying the way that you need them to, you're just going to take one and lay it down on top of the other, and then this is the side that I want to sew. So what I need to do here is I need to match up the seam. Okay, so I've got my seam open here. I've got my seam open on the other side. I want to match the seam itself open. Let's see, I've matched it, lined them up, and I'm going to put a pin in right there. Okay, now what we're going to have to do is just pin going along the top this way and pin going along the top this way, and then we'll be ready to sew a 1/4 inch seam one more time. All right, so now these are pinned together even across the top, and we're ready to go in and put in a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way across. You'll want to be sort of careful when you come to this center point because you have a lot of bulk in there. Your needle should be able to go through there just fine, but you may have to slightly pull on, not tug, not yank, but just give it a little bit of a pull as you're going over this spot, just to help the feed dogs get the needle to the other side of this bulky area right here, okay? Your pillow front is now complete, and now you just need to press it again so that the seam is going to lay flat. So I'm going to go here on the other side, and I'm going to press this seam open as well. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is we've got our back fabric. So I'm going to fold the edge under 3/8 of an inch, press it, and what I want you to do, because you may not know what 3/8 is just by looking at it, is use your seam gauge and measure 3/8, okay? Then you're going to turn it under again, 3/8. Okay, and we need to, after the second time around, we need to pin it just so that that doesn't come undone by the time we go to the machine. Okay, so I'm going to pin just in a couple places. Then I'm going to flip the fabric clear to the other end. Going to do the same thing. Again, you can take your seam gauge, measure it, and then turn again. This is called a double turned hem. Okay. Next, I'm going to pin this one. All right, and then finally what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the cutting table and cut this into 2 separate pieces. All right, so I've got my piece laid down here on my cutting table, and depending on how we do this in class, you may end up having a piece, 2 pieces that are already fit, but we're going to take this blade and cut into 2 separate pieces. All right, the next step in this process is to do the top stitch along your double folded hem. So what we need to do is we want to leave the machine on a 1. If you had just previously been sewing your strips together and doing that other half, it's probably on a 2. You'll want to switch it over to a 1 and just a standard stitch length. To do a top stitch, you're going to have your J foot on your machine, and on the inside of the foot there's a little ridge or a little notch inside right here in the middle, okay? So that's what I'm going to line the edge of my fold up with. Now, I've taught you before that I need to sew with all my fabric off to the left of the machine. Because this is such a small amount, it really makes it easy to tuck it inside of the arm of the machine and then be able to look at that ridge on the foot to keep my seam 1/8 of an inch. So a top stitch is going to be about 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to go ahead and start that out. I don't All right, so we have our completed front. Now we're gonna take our two pieces that we finished the top edge and lay them down. We'll lay them right sides together on top of our finished quilt front or pillow front. And these two finished edges are gonna kind of overlap each other. So I'm just gonna line up the raw edge all the way around. And this is gonna be the opening where we're able to take our pillow in and out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put pins in all the way around, and then we'll be ready to sew it. Now that it is all pinned, you can start from anywhere. So normally if I have you make a pillow, I'd have you leave an opening. We've got the opening right here. So we're gonna do a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. And you can choose whether you want to pivot at your corners or you can sew straight, 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 straight. It's totally up to you. Either one will work out just fine in the finished product. You've got such fine points on your corners this time. I am going to just clip straight across. Basically, you're going to be cutting off a little triangle shape, so something like that. And we'll do that on all 4 corners. And when you're doing that in the process, you'll be trimming up any extra threads that you have. Okay. The other thing you're going to check for here is to make sure that you didn't miss any of your pillow. Like there's no gaps or places where your needle went off the edge. You're just going to double check to make sure it is all sewn, and now you may flip it inside out or right side out. All right, so we're just going to reach inside here. You're going to flip it, and while you're flipping it, just like you did with the pillow form that you made, you're going to try to just poke out the corners. Flip this part over. Do the same thing, kind of poke out those corners. Okay, and then we're gonna press it one more time, but it's pretty much done. Now we're ready to press it and then stick the pillow form down inside of it, and then you have this